Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this discussion of Dante's Inferno, Cantos 8, 9, and 10. My hope here, as usual, is to point you toward some moments of dramatic interest, to provide some context that will increase their drama, and to prompt you to ask some questions that might be useful upon revisiting and rereading. There are a few significant moments in Cantos 8 and 9 that I want to start with. Dante and Virgil have at this point reached the second major division of sins. That is, we're moving out of the sins of incontinence and into the sins of malice that include the violent and the fraudulent. And that division is marked by a great city wall, that is, a great medieval stone wall. Dante calls this the city of Dis. They are obstructed, as they have been obstructed a number of times, by the guardians of that wall. But this time those guardians are fallen angels rather than mythical beasts or ancient rulers. As he's done in the past, Virgil tries to persuade these guardians, and Dante portrays him going up to them, having a secret conversation, and attempting to use the same authority that has got them safely through hell to this point. Surprisingly, however, they slam the door in his face, and he returns to the pilgrim somewhat downtrodden, disappointed, and frustrated, and in fact begins to voice his frustration and to wonder what might happen should the promised messenger not come and assist them. The pilgrim voices his own uncertainty until finally, in fact, the heavenly messenger, one of the angels who did not fall, appears, gliding over the water as a light in the dark, wafting from around his face the stench of hell. He comes past them, flings open the gate with little to no effort, and then is on his way. It's a wonderful moment in which we are made aware that though these guardians may have power over the inhabitants of hell, though they may even have power over Dante and Virgil at this point, before the power of something divine, they are simply impotent. They have no power to resist this divine messenger. They crumple and wither like nothing. This is a good time to point out that moments like this and others are the reason that many traditional scholars regard Virgil as the embodiment of human reason without faith, as the embodiment of the human mind working on its own according to ancient classical principles of reason, before the coming of Christ, before the advent of faith. It had been traditional at one time to regard him simply as an allegorical embodiment of that, but I think that understates the significant and moving role that he plays in many other ways. But certainly his limitations here hint toward that as one possible aspect of his character. Why does Virgil have trouble here where he did not previously? Because here we are dealing with the fallen angels. Here we are dealing with devils, specifically Christian guardians, over whom he doesn't know how to exercise his power. This scene is also, however, part of a moving and dramatic character arc for Virgil. The Virgil Pilgrim storyline will continue throughout the Commedia all the way to the top of the Purgatorio and beyond. This is really the first moment that we find Virgil fallible, capable of making a mistake, and we find Dante the Pilgrim in the position of wondering and caring and finding himself in uncertainty. Some scholars suggest, I think insightfully, that as we lose our faith in Virgil as omniscient, as all-knowing, we gain our affective attachment to him as someone whom the pilgrim loves and is moved by and does not simply admire. That is, as he becomes less perfect, our feelings for him grow, which is a pretty human thing. After Virgil and the pilgrim make it through the gates of Dis, they encounter, before the violent, a specifically Christian sin. Here in the sixth circle are the heretics. Why specifically Christian? Because in the ancient world, there was no universal church doctrine to which you either adhered or did not. And heresy is indeed a belief in doctrines condemned by the Roman Catholic Church. In essence, heresy is wrong belief according to the church. In Dante's hell, all heretics are entombed in sepulchres of fire. The particular ones whom we'll meet today were Epicureans, who denied the life after death. They believed that life ended with the tomb, and so the contrapasso here is that in fact their afterlife ends in a tomb. It's one of the many instances in which Dante suggests that in some way sin gives us exactly what we asked for. Paolo and Francesca are whirled around forever together in the never-ending storm in Canto 5, and in fact that's what they seem to desire in life, to give over their reason and be whirled around in a passionate storm in life. Here, Epicureans desired, that is, believed a certain thing, and they are granted that thing. Don't go looking for discussions of heresy, however, because you won't find them. This is yet again a moment in which Dante shifts our focus from the sin ostensibly under punishment to some topic that is more urgent and more important to him, in this case, politics and Florence. Certainly, the political factionalism in 13th century Florence was tearing apart its inhabitants, primarily in the generations that we're concerned with now, that is, the generations just before Dante. The two political parties at war were the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. We'll talk much more about this, but the Guelphs, in short, were a political faction or party that supported and were supported by the papacy, one of the two great powers in medieval Italy. And the Ghibellines were those who were supported by and who supported the influence of the emperor, the other of the two great powers. Dante and his family were Guelphs. The man who rises up out of his tomb here is one of the foremost Ghibellines. His name is Farinata degli Uberti. He was a widely respected, historic, intensely imposing political figure in the landscape in Florence, a great representative of the Ghibelline party, a noble, and someone whose name is still known today throughout Florentine histories. His tomb mate, the one who occupies the tomb with him and appears momentarily in the middle of the canto, is Cavalcante di Cavalcanti, the father of Dante's great friend Guido Cavalcanti, and also a member of the opposing party, the Guelphs. Farinata hears Dante speaking, recognizes his Tuscan dialect, and calls out to him. The first question that Farinata asks of the pilgrim really sets the tone for the rest of the discussion. At line 42, Farinata, looking about as if in disdain of all hell, asks, "Who were your ancestors?" What's he asking there? He's not asking because he's interested in whether he knew Dante's grandparents or not. He's asking, which side were you on? This is, in miniature, how political factionalism works. When you recognize someone whom perhaps you know, your first thought is this person a friend or an enemy? Is this person on my side? It's significant that the pilgrim does not answer something along the lines of, "Don't worry, we're all on the same side now," or "Why are you asking about sides? You're in hell," or "Don't worry about whose side I'm on. I'm journeying in order to find freedom." As soon as Farinata determines that Dante was indeed a Guelph, the war of words begins, and the two of them enter into a back and forth about who has exiled whom and which party has learned to return and which has not. To contextualize that, a brief history lesson. First, in Florentine politics, victory meant exile for the losers. There was no idea of a shared governance or a shared political responsibility. There was no sense that the political leaders should represent all the people of Florence and not just the people who supported them. The loser had no right to a voice, and the leaders of the losing party were very frequently exiled or worse. Another important piece of background is that Farinata was a great leader of the Ghibellines. He had been exiled by the Guelphs, and he had led the charge in exiling them. Especially important here, however, is that Farinata took part and led a charge in an infamous battle in the year 1260, during which he joined forces with the rival city of Siena to battle against the Florentine Guelphs who had taken power, and in fact, at this Battle of Monteperti, led the charge and ended up slaughtering thousands of Florentine Guelphs. After this decisive victory, the Sienese, along with the Ghibellines, proposed razing, that is, destroying entirely the city of Florence, erasing it from history. And according to Dante and other contemporary chroniclers, Farinata stood in the way of this utter destruction, which would have lost Florence to memory. This is why Farinata says, around 985, "In that I did not act alone, but where I was alone was there where all the rest would have annihilated Florence, had I not interceded forcefully." Farinata is a grand and imposing figure. He has incredible weight and heft about him, and Dante the Pilgrim clearly respects him. But the poet dramatizes by way of their interaction, by way of the immediacy with which they start to go at one another, how political factionalism turns us against one another and can act almost like an instinct, a reflex, a habit of attacking our neighbors rather than finding ways to get along with them. Scholars, of course, argue about how we are to regard Farinata, whether the poet wants us to regard him with a certain grandeur and respect, or whether we are meant to see him once again as self-deceiving and as deceiving us. He stood up for Florence, but of course he was the one leading the charge against it. He also offers Dante the clearest prophecy since Canto 6 of Dante's own forthcoming exile. A quick note on Cavalcanti, who is, as we said, Farinata's tomb mate. He rises up from the tomb diminutively in the middle of their discussion. Farinata ignores him, he ignores Farinata. The two of them do not communicate at all. Cavalcanti asks about his son, Guido, who was, in fact, one of Dante's greatest friends, a poet, a member of a noble family, and a Guelph. Cavalcanti asks, "If you're here because of your great intellect, where's my son?" Dante, in answering him, "I'm not here because of my intellect, I'm here in fact because I was lost," uses the past tense and causes the father to believe that his son has died. And at this, the father wilts back into his tomb, full of sorrow. Does the sweet sun no longer strike his eyes? Cavalcanti says. It's a moment of confusion, because in fact in the year 1300, his son was still alive, and he has simply misunderstood Dante's use of the past tense. But the emotional drama here is beneath the surface, and it runs very deep for Dante. In the year 1300, remember the poem was set in that year, Dante is serving as a prior, one of the highest political positions in the city. As you know, the city is on the brink of civil war. It's no longer the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, now it is the white Guelphs and the black Guelphs. And Dante and the other priors are searching for a way to reestablish some semblance of peace. In the attempt to do so, they agree upon exiling the major leaders of both parties. And one of those who was exiled during Dante's time as a prior was none other than Guido Cavalcanti. After several months in exile, Cavalcanti contracted an illness, probably malaria, and died before he could return to Florence. So remember, Dante's writing this poem around the year 1308. These events happened back in the year 1300. This is a stunning and dramatic staging of the guilt and the remorse that he must have felt, because the actions that he took as a prior undoubtedly led to Cavalcanti's death. At the end of the canto, he asks Farinata to mention to Cavalcanti's father that in fact his son is still alive, that he simply misunderstood the question. This is maybe the greatest and most painful irony of the canto, because in fact, in the fiction of the poem, in the year 1300, he would indeed die in just a few months, and in life, he had been dead for nearly a decade, and Dante knew that it was partially because of the actions that he took as prior. If, as I suspect, and as I predicted, you are beginning to really fall for Dante, you'll want to keep this figure in mind, Farinata degli Uberti, because he and his party play a major role in many of the events that follow, and his name and infamy still echo on the Florentine streets of today.